Asia Tech Podcast. Voice of the Asian tech ecosystem.
Hello and welcome to Asia Tech Podcast Stories. My name is Graham Brown. I'm really excited about this one. We're going to go and dive into one of the most exciting cities in the world. And to help us do that, we are joined by China buff, journalist, and now author Johan Nylander. Johan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Graham. It's my pleasure to be on your show.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. I've been looking forward to this since you agreed to appear on the show, because this is possibly one of the hottest topics right now, Shenzhen. And I say it's one of the hottest topics because a lot of people, especially people outside of Asia, are discovering Shenzhen for the first time. A lot of people have never heard of it. So Shenzhen Superstars, the book, How China's Smartest City is Challenging Silicon Valley. Put us in position straight from the top. Where the hell is Shenzhen anyway, for those that don't know?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question to start this discussion. So I'm based in Hong Kong, in the south of China, and right across the border is this mega city. It's one of the world's biggest cities. It's called Shenzhen. It's home to some of the world's leading technology companies. It's home to some of the world's most energetic, fantastic startups. And just to put the city in some perspective, some 40 years ago, the area was basically a small fishing village. It was nothing. It was poor, uneducated. Today is home to some 20 million people. It's the world's fastest growing city ever.
It's phenomenal, isn't it? I mean, the skyline has changed even. I mean, you moved to Hong Kong 2010, 2011, round about then, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And even, Hong Kong is one of the most vertical cities in the world, right? But Shenzhen, just over the border, the skyline in 7 years must have changed radically. Can you actually see that change from just looking at the city?
Asia Tech Podcast. Find out more at atp.show.
Yeah. I mean, it's mind-blowing. So I go to Shenzhen often, and every time it's slightly different. Last year, Shenzhen, this one single city, built more skyscrapers than the entire United States.
Wow.
And they did the same thing the year before that and the year before that. So it's just new skyscrapers are shooting up like bamboo. It just doesn't stop,
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people talk about Shenzhen on Asia Tech Podcast. Many of our guests have business interests there. Many of them are, like yourself, based in Hong Kong, and they have business in Shenzhen, which seems to be a great sort of best of both worlds. So what I'd like to do is unpack your book, Shenzhen Superstars, and talk about why Shenzhen. What makes it special? What's the magic formula? What's happening there? Also, you talk about how Shenzhen, China's smartest city, is challenging Silicon Valley. So what is it that people outside of the valley need to know about? And then some of the stories of the people inside of Shenzhen. I mean, I noticed in your book, there's some real characters like Naomi Wu, for example, that, in your book, you sort of detail the people living in Shenzhen and what the kind of lifestyles are like there, which I think is fascinating. Can we start with this story? There's this really interesting sort of introduction to your book about Scotty Allen, who is a Silicon Valley veteran, who would be, I guess, a Silicon Valley flag flyer, like he's very much pro Silicon Valley. And if I can quote, if I may, Johan, he comes to Shenzhen, reasonably open-minded, but he's coming there on a business trip. He looks around, he explores, he experiences, and you talk about what he experiences. And then he says, this is really important because there's two lines here which kind of set the tone. One is, he sees everything and he says, wow, this is cool. And then the second line is, wow, we're fucked. So can you unpack that a little bit? What's the context of that story, or what does it mean to us?
Yeah, so this guy, Scotty Allen, he's as you said, he's a Silicon Valley veteran. And it was important for me when I wrote the book that I don't say that it's a cool city. I don't have, as you said, I've interviewed like tons of local people, but I wanted like an outsider who comes from a totally different mindset, an American mindset, who comes to China, who comes to Shenzhen and goes like, wow, I wasn't prepared for this. So Scotty Allen, he told me, like many of his American friends and colleagues, they had this view of superiority that China is poor, China is uneducated. It's a place where we farm out the things that we don't want to do, right? And then he set foot in Shenzhen, and as you said, he was astonished. He told me that coming to Shenzhen is like visiting the future. This sort of feeling that all boats are rising. People are really smart, really innovative, really, really creative. And he told me how he realized that something unique was happening in this city, in the Pearl River Delta in Shenzhen, and that is that China is about to outsmart United States in terms of technology. And I think when it comes from a guy like that, who's been working as a software engineer at Google, he had worked for several startups in the Valley. He ran his own startup. I can believe him, right? He's got the background, he's got the credential to make such a statement. What was important for him to point out is that he doesn't see it as a competition. Is Shenzhen better than Silicon Valley? Is United States ahead of America? For him, it's more like all boats are rising. Like there are people both in the Valley, in China, in Berlin, in Stockholm, in Tokyo, doing really cool stuff, right? And I think that's quite important to point out. There are good people everywhere. What's important for people in the United States or in Europe is to realize that South China and Shenzhen, it's not just catching up with the United States. In a lot of areas, it's ahead of the curve.
Yeah, you talk in the book about patent filing as well, or patent, depending what part of the world you're from, and how now innovation is really sort of concentrated in cities like Shenzhen. So, I mean, let's talk about some of the data here so people can understand it from that perspective. I think, like you said, a lot of us Westerners, I mean, I live in Asia, but I still have, grew up in the West, think of China as like the cheap warehouse of the world, right? It's where we make the cheap knockoffs and the cheap technology. However, like you say in your book, like half of all the patents filed in China are coming out of Shenzhen. And these are not sort of patents which are, how to improve a manufacturing process. This is like artificial intelligence, drones, IoT, big data, real sort of cutting edge stuff, right? So do you think that, you talk about the innovation side of things in Shenzhen. Do you think that even now that people are unprepared for the kind of technology coming out of Shenzhen at the moment?
I think that people across the world desperately needs to pay attention to what's happening here. You have some of the companies in Shenzhen that are just mind blowing. One of the companies that files for most patents is Tencent. Is one of the world's biggest internet companies, right? They have an app called WeChat. Sometimes it's being compared to WhatsApp, but it's just totally wrong. So WeChat is if you combine WhatsApp with Facebook, with Google, with PayPal, with Amazon, and with any kind of with Uber, with Tinder, like you take all these Silicon Valley companies and combine them into one app. And I met this young woman. She's an entrepreneur in Shenzhen. She's 22 years old. She's CEO and runs her own company, as you do in Shenzhen when you're 22. Right? And she has an edtech company. She has this online platform where mentors meet with students, right? And it's an online platform. She doesn't have a website. I tried to Google her. I found nothing. Right. She doesn't have an app. So how can you have an online platform without being on internet, right? So her whole business is in WeChat. Like our whole platform is in WeChat. There's where mentors and students meet. They upload the documents, they communicate, all the payment functions are there, and the company does its marketing. And I asked her, the founder, like, so why don't you have a website? Why do you use WeChat? And she looked at me like I was an old grandfather. There's where people are, right?
Wow.
So WeChat is so big now, so it's becoming like a new online universe, right? It's like a new online universe. People use WeChat and not a normal browser, like not normal internet. So there's so much things going on there that are, behind the great firewall,
Yeah, I think this is something that visitors struggle with, isn't it? That often I hear a lot of people say they go to Shenzhen because that's the first city over the border from Hong Kong, really, the first big city. And they try and pay for a taxi, and they try and pay for a taxi with cash. And most taxi drivers won't take cash because you have to pay with WeChat. Or they'll try and pay, they'll go to some local restaurant and they can't pay because, they don't have WeChat. So in a sense, I don't think we're sort of prepared for that, that whole sort of system exists, especially when it comes to payments, that how far advanced they are, because, I think we just really have to take a look and lift the lid on places like Shenzhen, because like you say, the future's there already. We're playing catch up in many parts of the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, this thing with the mobile payments, the latest numbers that came out show that the Chinese make 60 times more mobile payments than people in United States.
Wow. Is that as a population or per head?
In total numbers.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we talk about mobile payments, for them it's just like, what do you mean? That's normal. Yeah. And naturally, the taxi driver, the restaurant, they will always accept cash. They love to make money, right? Mm-hmm. But you will feel old school. You have to bow your head and say sorry. And I mean, you go to restaurants. You don't ask for the menu. You scan a QR code on your table. The menu pops up on your phone. You click on the stuff you want to order. You press pay. You wait. 5-10 minutes later, it will arrive on your table. You don't have to sit and wave your arm and for you, can I order please? It's just so convenient. It's just so fast. And for the Chinese, this is normal now. You go to a street vendor who sells noodles. They do WeChat. I mean, everywhere, or Alipay. It's yeah. I mean, it's there. It's just normal for them.
Exactly. It is amazing. We'll unpack a little bit more on the tech side as well in a minute. Before we get there, Johan, why did you write this book? Why did the world need this book? Why did you need to tell the story of Shenzhen? Because it sounds like, there's a million stories in there. And if you come and have a look, you'll see it for yourself. So why did you need to go out there and tell that story?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know if it was me who chose to write about Shenzhen, or if it was Shenzhen who chose me as a writer.
Right.
I mean, someone had to do it. It's one of the world's most interesting, fascinating cities. Shenzhen and its companies and its people are redefining how we are engaging with technology. It's a city that grows faster than anything you've ever seen, right? And still, almost none of my friends back home in Sweden, none of my colleagues in United States and Europe have even heard of the city.
Right.
So you could put it in like this, right? Imagine a venture capitalist, like a tech startup venture capitalist, who has never heard of Silicon Valley, right? Who has never heard of Google. It's that absurd. So that's why I choose. I have to write these stories, right? And I have met so many fascinating people in the city. So yeah, I had to write it, right? and the response has been really good too.
Yeah, I can imagine. People are so interested in this subject, and for good reason as well. You mentioned the example of a VC not knowing about Silicon Valley or Google. I wonder how much of that is by choice. So, when you talk about Shenzhen, and especially when you talk about it outside of Asia, do you find that some people find it a little bit difficult to hear this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with a friend recently, and he said the reason everybody knows about Silicon Valley and no one knows about Shenzhen is that Shenzhen is such a difficult word to pronounce and it's so difficult to spell, right? So if you try to Google it, you won't find it because you don't know how to spell it. So, I mean, yeah, I totally agree that a lot of people in the West, they still sit on a high horse with a high hat, feeling superior. Like, we are the one running the world. We are the most advanced. China is just a copycat. We shouldn't worry. But that's just so wrong, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, then also things like a lot of people in China, if people in the West know about them or not, that's not so important. They make really good business. They have, the world's biggest home market. So maybe they don't care so much about what people across the world thinks.
Well, that makes it an even more interesting story, doesn't it? That maybe they don't need the West to complete this story. I mean, obviously they will work together because, like you say, there's great people everywhere in the world, but they don't rely on the approval of the West to, they don't have to be the next Silicon Valley, right? Which is obviously often the problem, isn't it? They try to become, the Silicon whatever, and often they can stand on their own right. I want to ask you a question, which was sort of it's the point raised by Jim Rogers, Jim Rogers is the adventure capitalist, the guy who's always on CNN or CNBC with his bow tie. And, he was one of the first people to get into China back in the 80s and 90s. And, he was saying, you've got to get into China because this is all going to happen. And there's a famous quote by him I want to talk about now, which he says, if you were smart in 1807, you would have moved your family to London. If you were smart in 1907, you would have moved your family to New York. If you were smart in 2007, you would move your family to Asia. And he moved his family from New York to Singapore, I think, or to Asia. And his kids speak Mandarin and so on. So he's fully, back in 2007, he moved to Asia. Do you think, and a lot of people talk about this shift, and I don't know to what extent it's hype, what extent is reality, but when you talk about Shenzhen, it sort of tells us that there's a sort of a focal point for this shift, that, the world is heading east in some way, right? Is it real? Is it something that's happening? Is it something that will happen in our lifetimes? Will there be a point where Shenzhen will become the new New York, the capital of the world? Those kind of titles. What's the reality?
Yeah, I mean, this is really exciting questions, and it's a thing that I think about a lot. So if you look at that, things are moving east. It's obvious. I mean, honestly, there's no way around it. You have Southeast Asia, you have Korea, Japan, and China. So out here is where everything is happening. There's no way around it. If you look at Shenzhen, if it's becoming a metropolis, if it's becoming the new New York or London, it's getting more international by the day. You have more foreigners moving in. You have more cocktail lounges, craft beer bars, stand-up comedy and stuff. At the same time, it's getting more and more Chinese because, for every Westerner moving to Shenzhen, you have, say, 1,000 Chinese moving into Shenzhen, right? From all over China. So at the same time as it's getting more international, it's also getting more Chinese. So it's for people in China, it's a really cool thing to move to Shenzhen because for them it's just exploding with different cultures, and I don't know where it's gonna. You will definitely have areas in Shenzhen if we look forward that will have a lot of Western and foreign faces. I mean, most definitely, it's already happening, and I think it's gonna accelerate.
Yeah, exciting times. Let's talk about some of the stories of the people in Shenzhen Superstar. You mentioned, one of the examples of this lady, the 22-year-old who runs her business through WeChat. It's just one example of that sort of that hustle, that natural hustle that's in Shenzhen. I wanted to ask you about this character, Naomi Wu, in your book, which is, it's just fascinating because it's sort of the other side, really. It's sort of the less obvious side of a very entrepreneurial environment. Tell us a little bit about her and why you wanted to tell her story.
Yeah, Naomi Wu, or she's online. She's famous for Sexy Cyborg, right? And she's a real like power girl. This is girl power, like full on. She is famous for being a hacker, a maker with the most, sexual approach you can ever imagine. So I was sitting in this like VR cafe waiting for her. She came in with like the shortest skirt I've seen in my life, like the most huge silicone boobs I've ever seen in my life, and high heels. And the whole cafe, like went quiet, and everybody looked at her. And she's really clever. Like she's really clever. So she says, people look at me, they think I'm a bimbo. But then they watch my videos. She makes these YouTube videos when she's making stuff. She's making like assembling her own 3D printer. And with the 3D printer, she's making stuff. And it's very creative from both in terms of what she's doing and also how she's doing it. Yeah. So first they think I'm a bimbo. Then they see what I can do. And then they think, wow, if she can do it, I can do it.
Right.
So she wants to inspire other young women to go into technology. She's got a lot of self-confidence. And what I also like with her, that not just that she's very talented in terms of technology, also that she's a strong individual. So a lot of people in the West, they think that all Chinese, they just do what they're told.
Right.
It's like an army of robots who sit in long rows in factories, just doing what they're told all day long. But you have a growing mentality of, I want to do my thing. Like, I don't care what other people do. This is more like a punk thing that you see in Europe, United States, And with this mentality, you have a lot of creativity, you have a lot of innovation, a lot of cool startups being set up, which I think is very important if you want to have a dynamic business life. And she's really like a really strong face for the whole making community in Shenzhen.
Yeah, fascinated by the fact you brought up that word punk, because if you draw parallels, that youth movement sort of go back to the mid late 70s. The punk movement is very sort of do it yourself, wasn't it? Even the fashion, if the fashion was like wearing a bin bag, and a safety pin, that was sort of cool because that's sort of you did it yourself. In a way, there's parallels here with Naomi. She's making her own things, right, and not playing by the rules and challenging people's perceptions about who you are or what you do. And I think that's fascinating because these are the last things you would assume that young Chinese people were doing, right? And I think that's really interesting. Is that a Shenzhen thing in particular? Do you think that's more sort of prominent, people like her in Shenzhen, or is that all over China?
Yeah, so you have some areas. If you look at the music scene, Beijing is definitely the most punk music scene, right? When it comes to technology and startup and like doing your own business, Shenzhen is definitely the epicenter. Every time I make interviews with these young kids running startups, I asked them, like, what's the secret behind the success in this city? And everybody tells me that everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, like everybody want to do their own business. A friend of mine told me in Shenzhen, no one wants to be employed, right? Mm. And I saw this study. It's a Swedish company called Universum. They make these studies every year globally. They ask graduates, people who are about to graduate from universities, like, where do you want to work? Like, do you want to work for the government, for a big consultancy company, or what do you want to do? In Shenzhen, it was like 60% said, I want to join a startup or do my own startup, like 60%. The equivalent number in Beijing was 15. Right?
Wow. So
that's a massive, difference in mentality.
What do you think the equivalent would have been in a European or a American city?
Yeah, I mean, it's really high. I think a lot of young graduates in Stockholm, for example, they want to work for a startup like Skype or Spotify, but they are already, they already have their feet on the ground, right? I think in Europe, in the United States, it's quite popular to work for startups also. Right. I don't know, like, I'm quite surprised when I look at the numbers in Sweden. People still want to work for the big consultancy companies. Like.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, wanting to work for and actually going and trying to get a job at one's different, isn't it? And those levels at 60% in China, in Shenzhen, graduates who want to work for a startup is phenomenally high in comparison to Beijing. That creates, I mean, this is an important part of the story, isn't it? The culture. I mean, you talk about innovation, you talk about, the resource side of things, the people, access to capital, all that stuff. But the culture's a really important part, isn't it? And this is where often when people talk about Silicon Valley, they talk about how Silicon Valley cannot be copied because it has a culture which is unique. If you're a startup founder, you go to Silicon Valley because that's where all that's where all startup founders go. And when you have that concentration of startup founders and entrepreneurs together, it's like entrepreneurs squared, isn't it? It's like, you're surrounded by people who it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail. It's okay to take risks. However, if you work in maybe London, for example, you're surrounded by people with jobs who, have a mortgage to pay, are thinking about their promotion, work for the bank, or work for the government, etc. So you get that kind of entrepreneurial zeitgeist like you get in Shenzhen. So I'm curious, like, how does that actually feel in Shenzhen? What kind of, is it really tangible? Can you see everywhere entrepreneurial activity, hustle, young people building stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is a very important point. The feeling, the atmosphere. Exactly. If you surround yourself with people who are, they are risk willing. They wanna do their own business. You will also be sucked into that kind of mindset, and I think that's really important. So if you go to Shenzhen, you go to Huatianbei, which is first of all is famous for being the hub for pirate goods in the world. Like, you can find anything here, copy of anything. But you also have all these people who are very creative, right? So you can find these iPhones with where you can add 3 or 4 SIM cards, right?
Wow, that would be good. That's amazing.
Yeah. So you have this, like, they do copies, but then they improve them, right? And everybody is a businessman. Like, everybody is a businessman. So today, the city doesn't make any money from piracy, right? Mm-hmm. But you still have this thing that you can walk down on the street. Like, if you're in hardware, first of all, you have this like co-working spaces like everywhere, accelerators. And you also have the access to hardware, to manufacturing. And you can walk down to Huatianbei and just buy any component that you want, right? Like Scotty Allen from that we talked about earlier. He built his own iPhone. He walked down on the street and just built his own iPhone. So you have this mentality that there's access to venture capital. You have all the components, you have all the factories. Everybody wants to make money, and everybody wants to run their own startup. So this is like in the air. This is what people breathe every day, and you just can't miss it when you go there.
Mm-hmm. You know, I wonder what the historical parallels were. Would it have been like going to San Francisco at the turn of the 20th century, maybe? You know, like whether it was the original pioneers panning for gold, or you know the entrepreneurs that came later in the earlier 20th century. There must have been that kind of vibe, right? A similar vibe, different era, similar vibe. Everybody had come here to make something, to better their lives, to look for work, to, you know, build a business or whatever. So I don't think we've ever, you know, we haven't seen this really in the last, well, I don't know how many years. There hasn't been a similar parallel in our lifetimes. You know, there hasn't been a creation of a city or a space in the world where there's this kind of activity, has there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is very important. Is you have, you know, access to talent, right? Access to money, but the most important is that the people in Shenzhen, they feel that it's our time, like it's China's time, and I want to be part of it. And Shenzhen is the best place to be, right? People in Hong Kong, they said you have that spirit in Hong Kong like 30 years ago, and now people are, you know, quite gloomy in Hong Kong. And also a very good thing with Shenzhen is that you can live there really cheap, right? Some parts of the city, the apartments are, you know, the most expensive in China, but then you can go to like other areas where you can get a flat for say $200 a month, right? So as an entrepreneur, you don't have to have those massive overhead costs, right? So a very good example of this is the telecom company Huawei. But when I grew up, you know, Ericsson, Sweden's Ericsson was always the biggest telecom company in the world. And 10 years ago, Ericsson was still twice as big as Huawei. Today,
especially on the back office side of things, right? They built the whole internet that ran telecoms, right? Effectively.
Yeah, exactly. All the stations and everything. So 10 years ago, Ericsson was still twice as big as Huawei. Now, 10 years later, Huawei is 3 times bigger than Ericsson. It's just mind-blowing. And remember that Huawei was founded 30 years ago in a small apartment in downtown Shenzhen. They had a starting capital of 21,000 RMB, which is about 3,000 US, 2,500 US. And the founders and the staff, they all worked from this small apartment, and they also lived in this small apartment.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. But that's not an unusual story in China, is it? I mean, you hear similar stories with Jack Ma and, you know, and so on, that real hustle, that true entrepreneurs really, who started with virtually nothing and built something amazing, you know, something really special. I wonder, Johan, if you sat a group of young Chinese entrepreneurs, or not necessarily entrepreneurs, but let's say 20-something Chinese from Shenzhen, you sat them with the same in Sweden and London and LA, that would be an interesting conversation, wouldn't it? That, you know, I wonder what their outlooks would be like and how they would be different in some way. Yeah,
I mean, first of all, this group that you just said, something extraordinary is going to happen, right? They will all come from technical backgrounds that are slightly different, and business background that are different, and culture backgrounds. I think if you get 10 people from Silicon Valley, Stockholm, Shenzhen, and London, and bring them together in one room, something really cool is going to happen, right? They're all going to bring different things to the table, but that would be a good room to be in.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there's so much to talk about Shenzhen. I want to talk about, you know, whenever I hear the media talk about Shenzhen, and I consider myself part of the media as a podcast, and you write for CNN and Forbes and so on, so you're part of the media as well. I sometimes hear parallels drawn between Shenzhen and Blade Runner. And is that justified? Is that kind of taking us down the right path? Does that help us understand it? Because, I mean, you know, I love Blade Runner as a movie, you know, and obviously, you know, Blade Runner, Ridley Scott set that originally on Tokyo. I mean, that was the backdrop, right? So, but it was a very dystopian, dark view of the future, wasn't it? It was sort of a very negative view of what a city would look like in the future. Do you think when people make parallels between Shenzhen and Blade Runner, it's justified? Are there things that, you know, we could take from that?
Yeah, I mean, the feeling in Blade Runner, some parts of Shenzhen and also here in Hong Kong, yeah, you can definitely feel it. And I never saw it as a very negative view of the future. Yeah, it's very dystopic. Yeah, I totally agree there. But it's also very, very exciting. You know, how everything is connected. You have a lot of people on the ground, and you also have a lot of, you know, technology that are connecting people everywhere. And this you can see in Shenzhen. You walk down some of the areas where, you know, kids are standing on the street selling robots that they have built themselves. You can buy any kind of tech stuff. Like you can buy any kind of tech stuff on the streets in these little back alleys. And you can also buy any kind of, you know, technology. You can build your own stuff. And you also, I mean, on the more negative side is that all of China is kind of turning into a big surveillance system. So that also taps into this Blade Runner thing. You have face recognition like everywhere on the streets. There's no way to hide anymore. And this is scary and it's really cool, right? If you compare to Blade Runner, like you walk into KFC in China, they have the camera recognizes your face. It feels, it sees how are you feeling today, right? And it will recommend a menu for you, and you pay by smiling, and the money is taken from your Alipay. So it recognizes you, it tells you what to eat, and it takes the money from you, right?
That's phenomenal.
And that's, I mean, when I was growing up, you know, that's a futuristic
right
thing, but it's here, right?
Exactly.
It's happening.
That's sci-fi movie stuff, right? I mean, you know, we've been waiting for that to happen. So, yeah, I mean, that's just amazing. I mean, we haven't even, you know, I'm conscious of the time, and there's something that, you know, we haven't talked about, which is really important to the bigger picture of, and something that Shenzhen's part of, and that's the Greater Bay. So, you know, again, I think, you know, today has been really useful for people who are interested in Shenzhen, curious, and your book really does go a long way to unpack that and help people understand it. And really one of the first attempts to tell the stories of people inside Shenzhen, which I think is phenomenal. It's exactly what's needed rather than just data. Let's talk about the Greater Bay, because I don't think people are even ready for this yet, right? I mean, a lot of people haven't even heard of the Greater Bay. So maybe we can start by talking about what the hell is the Greater Bay? This is something very, very fascinating.
The Greater Bay area is basically the cities around the Pearl River Delta. So for everybody who are listening now, go to Google Maps and check out the Greater Bay, the Pearl River Delta, and there you can see Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Macau, Guangzhou, and all these cities. So the plan is to connect these 11 major cities. They will have an economy bigger than Russia.
Yeah,
it's a monster, right? You have Shenzhen as the hub for innovation. You have Hong Kong. You have finance. You have shipping. You have the province capital in Guangzhou. You have manufacturing. You have the supply chain in all these factory cities around. And then if that is not good enough, you have Macau, where you can go and play some casino.
Yeah, it's incredible to try and measure the size of this thing, you talk about all those cities connected. I mean, there's 11 cities, I believe, in Greater Bay, right? So depending on who you ask, between 60 and 70 million population. Put that into context, California has 39 million. So it's 50% bigger in terms of people than California. And then you have the GDP, which, again, it varies by estimates, but $1.5 to $2 trillion. And that's growing fast as well. I mean, that's the key part of this story as well. It's how fast that's growing. And you talk about connecting it, and this gets really exciting. I mean, there's so many different angles and stories on that whole connection. I mean, there's the bridge that's just, or is it opened? I don't know, between Hong Kong and Macau, which that's the longest bridge in the world. That's due to open in 2018, right?
It will be open soon.
Okay. And then you have the bullet trains that run through the area. I mean, how sort of easy it's going to be to get around this thing? I think, I don't know what the numbers are, but from Hong Kong to Shenzhen, 20 minutes or something. Is that true? I mean, have I heard that right? By bullet train?
No, that's wrong. It will not be 20 minutes. It will be 15 minutes.
All right. Okay.
From downtown Hong Kong to downtown Shenzhen is just before you have finished your cup of coffee, right?
And that's just incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. So in terms of infrastructure and the transportation, it will be like one big city, right? But to connect what we talked about before, about the people, the feeling, that's the challenge. Will Hong Kongers feel part of mainland China? Will people in Macau feel connected to the factory cities? Will we have this integration? Will it happen? I think it will happen. But there's a lot of resistance in Hong Kong, and there's a lot of people in China who don't really know how it's all going to happen. But it will be an ecosystem where everything you need will be under one roof. You will have everything you need, from innovation to manufacturing, from shipping and finance. It will be, I think this will be the world's most powerful business hub.
That's a powerful statement in itself, Johan. And, that I wonder if the world is ready for that. But I mean, you said it, and the data is out there, the stories and the evidence is out there, right? So, I mean, but you choose to live in Hong Kong, and this is what I'm interested in, that, okay, Shenzhen's a phenomenal place for business, but do you choose to live in Hong Kong because maybe it's a bit more relaxed? I mean, Hong Kong's I love Hong Kong as a city, but why do you choose that sort of setup when Shenzhen's there, all the opportunities just over the border and only 15 minutes away?
Yeah. So I love Hong Kong. It's, growing up in the 80s with these Kung Fu films.
Yeah.
There's this vibe here. Hong Kong is truly international, right? There are people from all over the world. Everybody speaks good English. You have, restaurants from everywhere, especially Asia, of course. You also have rule of law here. You have freedom of press. You have freedom of speech. All these things that are important for me as a journalist. I never have to be worried that, someone will, knock on my door and tell me that I can't do this, I can't do that. I feel as a journalist safer in Hong Kong than I would in mainland China. And we also see how China is getting more totalitarian, right? So this is the balance, right? The political side of China, which it's quite disturbing at the moment. And you have the business side, the innovation side, which is just so appealing and so, lucrative for businesses. So this is a trade-off, right? This is the trade-off you have to live with if you do business in China as a foreign company.
I'm sure there must be people around the world who are trying to weigh this up as well. And for those that have listened to this podcast and those that have maybe read your book and got interested in China, Shenzhen, the Pearl River Delta, the Greater Bay, and what's happening over here, how would you, what sort of advice would you offer them, Johan? If you were talking to a young graduate now who says, hey, Johan, like, I'm really pissed off with you. I was going to, graduate. I was going to go and join the bank and it was all going to be good. But then you bloody well wrote this book and it put this idea in my head that there's another world out there. I'm going to graduate from university in Gothenburg or London or New York or somewhere in San Francisco. And now things have changed. Should I get over there? What should I do? I mean, is it too early for me as a graduate to go and start my career there? Should I visit? Should I don't know. Should I go and study Asia studies in university? I'm sure this is creating a bit of confusion in people's heads now, because now we have options, whereas before it was a bit more sort of all laid out for us. How would you advise these people?
No, I mean, first of all, I tell people, be open-minded. I mean, don't join the bank. do something more exciting. Imagine, say 30 years ago, someone said, hey, I've heard about this really cool place, Silicon Valley. Right. You should check it out. I heard about this company, Apple. And you go like, nah, I don't know. It doesn't sound very fascinating, and you miss the whole thing. I'd tell everybody that you don't have to go and live in China, right? You don't have to go to live in Asia. It's for some people. Some people prefer Europe, right? Europe has some values that I'm really missing, right? Or United States, but come here, like travel in China, work here for a year or two, work as an English teacher. Like before you join the bank, come to China and work as an English teacher, or just, bum around for a year, learn to know the people here and realize that China is not behind Europe. It's not behind United States. It's here, and it's going to take over the world in terms of business. So just be open-minded to what's happening here and be curious. It's really a cool place to travel and live. I mean,
yeah. I mean, you don't even have to, like you say, you don't have to live there to be part of it somehow, right? We live in an increasingly connected world, but just to be aware of it and have connections, and great advice that you offer. I mean, just buy that plane ticket and show up, right?
I think
that works.
Even if it's a very connected world and you can communicate with everybody, if you set your feet ground, I mean, you will never understand Tokyo until you have actually been there, right?
Yeah.
And you can never understand Shenzhen until you have actually walked on the streets and hang out with local people. Then you will have the connection. And so this is something I found very important. This is what I tell all my friends. Just go to Shenzhen, just check it out, because this city is going to change the world.
Wow. Johan Nylander, everybody, the author of Shenzhen Superstars, How China's Smartest City is Challenging Silicon Valley. You can get it on Amazon. Go and get yourself a copy, because that's probably the first thing you could do right now. You don't have to book a plane ticket. You can go and buy that book and read that, because you can read it all in, well, it's quite a quick read, isn't it? It's you've given people an opportunity to get a taste of the future, and just a short soundbite as well. But some of the stories in there are absolutely fascinating, and Johan's done a great job today of sharing those with us. Johan, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Where do people find out more about you if they want to find out a bit more about your background and so on?
You can go to my website, johannylander.asia, or maybe easier, shenzhensuperstars.com, or just Google my name. I'm all over the web now.
Fantastic. Johan, thank you so much. Come back as well. Give us an update.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, things change so fast, as you say. The speed of change is phenomenal in that part of the world. So come back on the show and give us an update and let us know. We'd love to hear some more of your stories about the people that you've met out there in places like Shenzhen, because it really does fascinate us. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure, Graham.
You've been listening to Asia Tech Podcast. Find out more at atp.show.